It's Lucy Lich, and this is Tiny House Conversations. It's the Australian-based podcast where I interview experienced tiny houses, tiny builders, and adventurers in the tiny world so you can discover how to create, build, and transition into tiny life. Before we get into today's episode, I want to tell you about a wellness company whose products I've been using for many years, which I'll also have in my tiny house, and you might like to as well. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while and following along, or you know me personally, you'll know that health is super important to me. It's my number one value, and that includes a healthy home environment, especially a healthy tiny home environment. And Block Blue Light are an amazing company who supply specialty downlights, light bulbs, reading lamps, blue blocking glasses, and much more to help reduce your exposure to artificial light from all your devices, regular LED lights, and other unnatural sources of lighting, as well as electromagnetic fields or EMFs, especially at the wrong times of the day or night. Artificial light can impact our sleep and can contribute to other health effects, often unknowingly, which we'll cover in a future episode. And just like anything, the key is what impact this has on our health over the long term. Block Blue Light's products use amber and red lights or lenses, think sunset, candle, moonlight, and fire vibes, which humans naturally would have been exposed to, especially in the evenings in our ancestral past. I especially love my clear crystal blue blocking glasses to wear during the day to work on my computer, as well as their light bulbs and twilight sleep lamps at night, and their twilight red light torches for camping weekends away. And in my tiny home, instead of having regular LED downlights, all my downlights are amber ones from Block Blue Light, which means I don't have to worry about exposure to unnatural blue light. And for someone who has had challenges with sleep for several years, I absolutely notice a difference in sleep when I use my specialty blue blockers, lamps, and lights, which have been shown to support production of your sleep hormone melatonin for healthier sleep patterns. Now, the good news is Block Blue Light are offering you, a listener of the podcast, 10% off your order when you use my unique link and code. Just head over to tinyhouseconversations.com/blue light and use the code THC podcast, that's THC for Tiny House Conversations, to get your discount. I'll also put a link in the show notes for you for easy access. And if you haven't heard my Tiny House conversation with naturopath Amy Skilton all about reducing EMFs in your tiny home or any home, this includes reducing your exposure to blue light. So check out episode number 32, and I'll put a link in the show notes to that as well. And stay tuned for a podcast all about reducing artificial blue light in your tiny home and why it's important for your health. Now, here's the intro for today's show. Hey, it's Lucy, and welcome back to Tiny House Conversations. Today I'm doing something a little bit different. This is going to be a solo cast, and in this episode I'm sharing with you more of the details of the design of my own tiny home. And if you've been listening for a while, you've been following along, you'll know that Designer Eco Tiny Homes based on the south coast of New South Wales are building my tiny house as we speak, actually. So September 2022 as of recording. And if you haven't listened to episode number 33, I interviewed Grant Emons, the founder of Designer Eco, as well as episode number 35, I interviewed Danielle Dooley, the custom designer at Designer Eco Tiny Homes. And I'll put a link in the show notes for those episodes so you can go back and take a listen to those. And before I get into the details, first, I just wanted to share with you why I chose to go with Designer Eco Tiny Homes, because there are many great tiny building companies here in Australia, and some of them have been on the podcast. Actually, most of the main ones I've interviewed on the podcast, and some episodes will be coming out in the near future, so stay tuned for that. But back in early 2020, I first came across Designer Eco at the Tiny Homes Festival in St Ives in Sydney. And they had one of their 7.2 meter lifestyle series homes on display. And that was the first time I ever saw a tiny house in person. Up until that point, I'd only seen them on Instagram, on YouTube, watched the different videos. And so it was really exciting to be able to go and see tiny homes in person. And theirs was the first one I saw out of all the different models there. And it stood out to me straight away. I absolutely love the style and the quality of the build. And it was just so beautiful. And I had this feeling of, I could live in this. And after that day, I was like, yep, this is the path I want to create for myself. I really feel like this is an alignment for me. Living this more back to basics way of life and closer to nature, lessening the impact, and of course having this sort of minimalist way, which was something that was already part of the way that I live anyway. And I started to follow Grant and Designer Eco online, and I was listening to podcasts and watching videos and just seeing what they were doing on social media. And then towards the end of 2020, I decided to take a trip from Sydney down to their workshop in Ulladulla just to check things out more, to ask questions, to see more of the builds in progress. And something else that I found out was that they do high-level customization, and that was another big tick for me because I had many features of my tiny home, which you'll hear more about today in the episode, that I wanted to do. And not all builders will do high-level customization. Some of them will have, or most of them will have their base models, and then you can maybe add on some extras and little things here and there. But these guys do high-level customization down to kind of building your home from scratch if that's what you want to do. And then after doing lots of different research, it was really important for me to find an ethical, trustworthy, reliable, professional builder. I eventually decided that Designer Eco is who I want to work with. And even though I went to the showroom at the end of 2020, it actually took me until the end of 2021 to bite the bullet, to pay the deposit to get on the building schedule, to be like, okay, now is the time. Like, I feel like in that year, it just wasn't the right time when I was initially there. And then as many things started to unfold in our collective life, you know, around the world and in my own life, I was like, okay, now is the time. And then once I paid the deposit at the end of 2021, the custom design process started around April. And then, you know, we took our time, probably a couple of months to get everything done. And that was a really great experience. I learned so much, and it was a completely new experience for me. So I actually went into all of this a little bit apprehensive, just, you know, like anything when you're going into something new and you're not sure what's going to happen or how it's going to turn out, or if you'll understand, or, you know, just all that uncertainty and that unknown. And also it's such a big commitment too. So I was also going through this whole thing of, wow, I just paid all this money, and, you know, like the what if, and the, you know, just the ego kind of comes in and then tries to protect you and has all these different stories and thoughts. But it was at the same time very, very exciting. In terms of the size of my tiny home, I decided to go for one of the 6-meter long tinies, which is a little bit smaller than, I guess, the most common or popular size of tiny homes, which is 7.2 meters. And it's a little bit bigger than the typical Airbnb of 4.8 meters. And what I also thought was, you know, yes, this is going to be my home, but I'm going to want to build a deck and increase the space of my tiny home anyway, with having more of an outside space once I, you know, settle in and get on the land and then look at building a deck. And so because I had quite a few months to prepare for the design meeting and just time to think about what it was that I wanted to create, and one of the main resources that I used to help write notes and prepare for my design meeting was Tiny House Decisions by Ethan Waldman, who's the host of the Tiny House Lifestyle podcast over in the States. And if you haven't listened to my Tiny House conversation with Ethan, he was on the show at episode number 25, and we actually talked all about his Tiny House Decisions guide. And he basically outlines all the different decisions that you might have to make when it comes to building your tiny house or having one built for you, as well as, you know, transitioning into the tiny lifestyle. And so he really helped me to go through the different systems. And what I really started with was just writing some notes out about what was most important to me. Like, if I had maybe 3 to 5 primary requirements, what would they be? And for me, my absolute number one priority and value is building a healthy home environment. So health is my number one value. And so that included things like natural, non-toxic building materials where possible, really good ventilation, so that, can minimize mold, even looking at things like not having carpet and supplying my own paint, natural paint and natural finishes of oils or varnishes, and then also looking at the EMF, the electromagnetic field situation of where the electrical wiring is going to be and the light fittings, and not having anything that's electrical around the bedroom. So no electrical wiring or power points or anything like that in the bedroom, and then not having the kitchen underneath the bedroom, which I'll get to in the layout section, but not having the kitchen in the bed underneath the bedroom so that I don't have the appliances, the electrical appliances, which can create electric and magnetic fields that are just underneath where I'm sleeping. So just lots of things like that. And I also thought, okay, well, I really love cooking and cooking is essential for me. And so I want to have a good amount of bench space. And so thinking about that. And then I also knew I wanted to work towards being off grid. So just making notes around maybe having a hybrid system or what kind of features that I could have to make the tiny house off grid friendly, or to be able to be off grid friendly in the future. And then with the help of Tiny House Decisions, I wrote down things like plumbing, water, electric, gas, refrigeration, ventilation, heating and cooling. Those are like some of the main systems. And then writing down what I wanted to have around each of those features. And then what I also did was go through the base model of the Designer Eco tiny house that I was having built, because what happens is they have a base model and then you can kind of make as many adjustments to it as you want, but kind of going off the base model as a guide. And so I went through the whole base model and I wrote down the different things that I wanted to maybe add to the base model, or I wanted to maybe amend in some way. And so I found that really helpful as well. And then I wrote down all the different common areas of a home. So whether it's kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom, having a loft, thinking about, again, the different features like the water, the power, the plumbing, electricity, and just writing out all the different questions I had regarding, should I go for a gas cooktop in the kitchen or an electric? Or is it possible to have a mini washing machine or not? Can I change the size of the fridge? Can I supply my own light bulbs? Is it possible to have the sleeping loft at the opposite end of the house to the kitchen and the bathroom? Just so many things like that. So I would really recommend, because you're going to have so many questions, is just to have these different categories and then write down all the different questions within those categories. And then you'll find, and this is what I found, is when I went through the design meeting, is that a lot of those questions were answered just in our conversation. And then if they weren't answered, I was able to go back to my notes and just ask those questions to Danielle. And then when I was thinking about the different power sources, like whether electricity or gas, I also wrote down like, what is it in my home that's going to potentially need electricity and what might need gas? Just a side note here, I wanted to actually try and do as little gas as possible. And so yeah, most of what I'll be running will be on electricity, but we'll get to that. And then one of the other resources I found really valuable that helped me make more notes was a book called Tiny House Designing, Building and Living by Andrew and Gabriella Morrison. And that book accompanied with Tiny House Decisions by Ethan. Those were the two main resources that were really, really helpful and really thorough and helped me learn so much even before going into the design meeting. And then I feel also helped me prepare with different questions that I could ask and help to give me more of an understanding about the good questions to ask or the necessary questions to ask. And so I'll put a link in the show notes for Tiny House Decisions and also for Andrew and Gabriella Morrison's book too. Now, when it comes to the design process and working with Danielle, one of the first things she said to me was, talk to me about your dreams and desires. Tell me what you have in your head if all your dreams came true. And so that's when I shared my overall most important value of a healthy home environment and having as many natural features as possible. And so as I mentioned before, that included strategic electrical wiring, strategic layout of the home, having no smart wireless or Bluetooth technology or appliances in the home, having good ventilation, being able to use natural paints. So whether it's on the walls, the ceilings, the trims, different oils and on the interior and the exterior. And I will go into all of this in more detail. I'll do a separate episode on creating a healthy home environment and the exact details and things that I did in an upcoming episode. And then a couple of other helpful things that Danielle said to me was, we want to allocate the most amount of space to your living function as opposed to your storage function. And then she also said, in terms of like the layout and the floor plan of the rooms, because that's one of the things that we talked about first, she said, think about a rectangle, where you want to put it on site and then what you want to look at. So I found like kind of having those little tidbits was really helpful to come back to. And so what we ended up doing was, quite often, a lot of the tiny homes have, if they're going to have a sleeping loft, which I do, they often have the kitchen right underneath, and I didn't want to do that. So I asked if we could have, so I have 2 lofts. I've got a storage loft, and then underneath the storage loft is the bathroom, and then the kitchen's next to that. And then you kind of come into the lounge space, which is then underneath my sleeping loft. And again, that was very strategic when it came to just, especially I think the electrical wiring and appliances and things like that. And so that was for the layout and the floor plan. And then I might talk a little bit about what I'm doing with the loft bedroom. So one of the main things for me about that was I wanted to make sure that I could stand up in my loft. Like I didn't want to have to crouch down every single night I went to bed. And I remember, I think it was episode number 4 with Ryan and Ziski from New Zealand, that was one of the first times where I'd seen someone put a landing in their loft. And so up in the loft, I have the floor where my bed sits. And then right next to my bed on the left of my bed, there's a sort of lower part where it creates more space so that I'm able to stand. And then I've also got a skylight, which I'm really excited about, especially I think in the springtime and the summertime, being able to open that up and look out and maybe even climb up there. And yeah, that was like definitely a feature that I wanted to have. And then I've also got a window. I've also got sliding windows on both sides of the bed, so the left and the right. It was really important for me to just have that cross ventilation, but also have that opportunity to be able to see out of both windows for, amazing views. And I moved down to the South Coast not that long ago from Sydney, and so I didn't bring a bed with me. And so I've got, for my tiny house, I've ordered a mattress and a bed frame from the Natural Bedding Company, so they don't use any chemicals and their bed frames aren't treated. And so I chose their Aurora mattress and their low-line bed frame, which is a minimalist kind of bed frame, which I like because there's not, in a tiny house, there's limited space, and I didn't really want to have like this big bulky bed frame. And then at the end of my bed, we included a timber handrail as well, just for safety. Now, I decided to not put any kind of storage stuff in my bedroom. I just really wanted it to be a place where I sleep and not to have too much clutter around there. However, I may look at getting a small natural timber bedside table in the future or some smaller storage options. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of keep it minimal in this space for now. And then the roof line we decided to go with, initially I was going to go with a pitched roof, so kind of like this cabin-like feel. But then when Danielle was kind of putting the design together and we were realizing that because of we're having the landing, that, obviously when you have the landing and the floor is a little bit lower upstairs, that's going to take some of the space from whatever space is underneath. And in this case, that was going to be the lounge space, like where the couch or sofa bed in this case would be. So Danielle pointed out that if we ended up going with a skillion roof, which is a more of a flat type roof, that it would open up more space in the loft for me, for headroom and things like that. So that we ended up going with the skillion roof. And I'm actually really happy that we have, because interestingly enough, Danielle pointed out to me that all the designs that I sent to her that I liked of cladding of the outside of different tiny homes, every single one of them was a skillion roof, even though I initially thought I want to go with one of the cabin style ones. But yeah. And then leading up to the loft, I've got some loft stairs, and The choice was between a timber tread and a riser, so having both the tread and the riser made out of timber, or having the tread made out of timber and then a white riser, melamine riser. But I really, and even though I love both looks, I think especially the white kind of gives it a more Scandinavian feel. I really loved the idea of having just the complete timber stairs. And I think also just because I walk around barefoot a lot, is just like not having those marks on the white parts as well. And so let's go to underneath the loft bedroom. So one of the things I wanted to do was I found an organic futon sofa bed that so it could double as a couch in the daytime, and then if someone wanted to sleep over, there was a futon that was easily foldable as well. Then we've ended up including a combination of a sliding window, awning window, and I just love that the lounge space really just kind of has all these different windows, and I can imagine how beautiful it's going to be just to be able to stand there or sit there and just look at the amazing views through those windows. I'm really excited about that. And by the way, the windows, I decided to go for white windows, white aluminium windows that are double glazed rather than black. I think typically, or quite commonly, I see a lot of black windows, and a lot of designer ecos usually come with black. But because I was thinking about the cladding on the outside, as well as do I prefer white or black on the inside, it was kind of, just navigating through what I wanted to achieve with having those windows. And so I decided to go with white, and I'm really happy with that. And then above where the sofa bed would be, there are a few storage cupboards there, so that'll be handy. And so moving to the kitchen, as I mentioned before, the kitchen is important to me. I do really like to cook, so I wanted to have a good amount of bench space. And I also needed a workspace because I work from home as well. And so what we have is like this extended timber bench top that also doubles as a workspace for me. And I remember Daniel also asking, like, how do you cook? What appliances would you use most often, and what might need storage? And so for me, it's the oven, the stove. And I did say slow cooker, but I feel like I'm going to sort of change the way I do things because of the whole power thing in a tiny house. And so I also am aware, like, I would probably like to be able to cook outside at times, whether using the barbecue or on the fire, something like that. And so then it was an option of, do I want to keep the 2-burner gas stove, which comes with the base model, or do I want to maybe remove that altogether? Because I was kind of iffy, as I mentioned before, about the having an open flame in the home and the whole gas thing. And so the other suggestion Danielle had was, well, we could take away the gas stove and then you could just put a power point. And then if you want to get a portable electric stove yourself, you could just plug that in there. And so that's what I decided to do. I just got a 2-burner electric stove, and not an induction one though, because the induction ones have a lot higher EMFs, electromagnetic fields. And if you want to know more about EMFs, I'll put a link in the show notes for episode 32 with naturopath Amy Skilton. And then, of course, there is a range hood, which is really important for the ventilation, which is vented to the outside, and going with an electric oven. And then moving to the bathroom. So Danielle said to me, do you want to have a smaller bathroom, or would you prefer to have like a lot more space in your bathroom, or where do you want to allocate the most space? And I decided that I would rather allocate more space to the kitchen area or the lounge area rather than having a bigger bathroom. So we've gone for a small bathroom, which has a vanity basin and tap and shower screen, of course. And then I've decided to go for a composting toilet. And because I was going through this design process at a time where my tiny parking space was kind of up in the air, like I had so many different things going on with that, which I'll talk more about in detail in another episode. But because I wasn't 100% sure exactly where I was going to be parking at the time, or yes, I did have a tentative parking space, but it was kind of a bit up in the air as well about what the owner would be okay with having in terms of like composting and grey water and stuff like that. And actually also what was available on the land, so whether a septic system or not. I asked if we could make like a hybrid situation, so there would be like a connection point if I needed to plug into mains sewage for a flushing toilet down the track, but that I wanted to go with a composting toilet initially, and then have that option, just in case. But hopefully I never have to do that, because I would much prefer to have a composting toilet just to not waste so much water and to be more eco-friendly and all of that. And so this was another interesting thing too. So it was a choice between, well, which composting toilet am I going to use? And I have a tiny house conversation, episode number 15, with Anthony Smith from Water Wally, who is such a lovely guy. He really knows his stuff. He's an environmental engineer. He knows composting toilets and grey water systems like the back of his hand. And he's been so helpful to me in my journey of sort of figuring out what the best option would be for me. But if you haven't listened to that episode, I'll put a link in the show notes for that as well. So just talking to Anthony, it was kind of like, okay, would a split system be a better option for me in my situation right now, or would a self-contained option be better for me now? And I was kind of going back and forth and just trying to decide what's the best option. What am I going to be okay with in the parking space if I do happen to lock this in for sure? Or what happens if I maybe have to go and park at a caravan park for, whatever reason, just in case like the parking space didn't turn out, or whatever it might be. And when it comes to a split system composting toilet, I was talking to Anthony about the Natureloo 650. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And I was also talking to him about the self-contained one, which many people will know about the separate tiny, which is often used in tiny homes by different building companies, and also just tiny houses when they're doing their own DIY builds. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's a Swedish company. But I wanted to also support Australian made where possible, and sort of minimize where I could having things that have traveled for such long mileage across the world to get to me, and all the impact that can have in the bigger picture. And it just so happened that Water Wally was coming out with the Wandering Wally, which in episode 15 Anthony mentioned it briefly, and it was a self-contained, very similar to the separate tiny, but the capacity of the liquids and the solids chamber both a little bit larger, which I think is a good thing. So obviously that means less emptying and all of that. And it also has a urine diverter too. And so after going back and forth and asking so many different questions to Anthony, who was super patient and generous with his time and with his knowledge as well, I decided that, okay, I'm going to go with the Wandering Wally, because it would be the easiest for me to manage, at least in the short term, until I definitely knew I'd found somewhere, much longer term for parking my tiny. And so I'll put a link in the show notes as well for the Wandering Wally. And, if you have any questions, I'm sure that Anthony would also be very happy to answer them, and, can contact me through his website, which will also be in the show notes. And just wrapping up on the bathroom here, of course, I wanted to think about ventilation too. So I've got a window there. And initially I was going with a single glazed louver window, just because of the beautiful feature. It looks really beautiful. And then kind of thinking about things more, and also after recording the Mold Proof Your Tiny Home episode with naturopath Amy Skilton in episode 28, she talked about, as best you can, at least have double glazed or thermally broken, and where possible with your windows. So that's when I was like, okay, I'm gonna change the single glazed louver to a double glazed window instead. And then I realized I didn't finish talking about some of the things in the kitchen. So in the kitchen, I also have a just under 200 litre fridge, as well as some storage cupboards. And then the loft stairs also has storage underneath it as well. And then moving to the other loft, that's going to be my storage loft. So it's a little bit smaller than the bedroom. And that's where I've asked to have a power point and an internet point up there to have my modem, because I don't want to be sitting next to my modem, which is another story for another time. And I'll be sharing more about that in a healthy home environment episode. But Danielle's also asked the electrician to run a cord or a cable underneath the tiny that then kind of connects up into an Ethernet port underneath the kitchen bench, which is also my workspace where I'll be using my computer. And by the way, the kitchen bench is a mountain ash timber bench top, and I can't wait to see it. It's going to be so beautiful. And I've asked And I've asked them to use a natural countertop oil finish on that, which is a liver's countertop oil, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Now, I touched on storage a little bit before, so I have storage in the storage loft. I may end up putting a tall boy or a wardrobe or something up there, but for now, it'll be space for different boxes and stuff like that. And I've got storage in kitchen cabinets underneath the loft stairs. And I may look at getting a small garden shed just for some extra storage as well. I kind of like the idea of not having too much stuff inside my tiny home, not having the clutter and all of that. And when it comes to my flooring, so of course with a tiny house, the weight is a very big consideration. And so all through the design process, I kept having to come back to what's most important, but then also having this awareness of what are some of the things I might need to be a bit more flexible about and not include as an additional extra when it comes to like budget. The standard floors that usually come with a base model of vinyl, which is plastic, and that's something I'm aware of minimizing a lot. However, in this case, because of the weight issue and then the added cost implications, if I was going to do something like timber or maybe bamboo, I kind of had to go, you know what, I think this is a part of the home where I'm happy to just go with the base model because with vinyl it is hard wearing and no, it does last a long time, and sourcing, even without the weight implications, sourcing natural untreated timber as well as untreated bamboo, it can be quite hard to source as well as expensive. So that was something where I had to kind of compromise with, okay, I'm just going to go with this. And then the insulation is earth wool, which I was happy to go with. And so then when it comes to the resources like water, power, and sewage, and then Daniel asked me, are you planning to collect rainwater? Do you need guttering for rainwater collection? So that's something that I've opted to go with. And then because the tiny house is built to caravan codes, it comes with a 15 amp inlet plug that you kind of plug in like a caravan. And so that it already comes with that. And as I mentioned before, because my parking space wasn't 100% settled at this point, the question of what I was going to do for power was kind of up in the air too. So I initially just said, okay, let's just do the 15 amp inlet as normal. And then what Designer Eco can do is they don't put solar panels on the roof anymore as standard, but they do have the option of if you want one solar panel that's then linked to all the different 12 volt appliances like maybe the downlights and the composting toilet fan and things like that they can do that as an option. And as Grant mentioned in episode number 33, he talked all about the reason why they developed the solar trailers, but it took a lot of sort of going back and forth and figuring out like what is going to be the best option for me long term and what's going to be available at the parking space. And so I actually decided that I am going to get a solar trailer, one of their 6-panel solar trailers with a manual generator. And so, yeah, I'm excited to be able to have, I guess it is a big investment that I was kind of having to consider all along. Yeah, is interesting though, because, and I'll talk about this in another episode too, but going through this process, I had this running list of expenses of course, there's the tiny house build, but then there's also, well, the addition of a solar trailer, and then there's delivery, and then there's tradespeople, whether if you're not doing it yourself, plumbers, electricians, excavators, furniture, and so many different things. So it was this back and forth of also figuring out, well, do I have enough budget for this, or can I, do we need to remove this from the build so then it opens a bit more space up for me to be able to afford this? Is really interesting. And I'll talk more about that in a future episode, because I think that that's really something important for everyone to know that's going through this process, that your final cost, and I think Joe Arneson mentioned this in our episode together, number 27. Gosh, I'm going to be putting a lot of links in the show notes for this episode. He talked about how reminding people that your tiny house build cost is not the final cost of your tiny house. And so I want to dive deeper into what I did and how I worked things out and all the different things that I had on my running list of expenses that seemingly continues to grow and grow as time goes on, and when you kind of getting to those final stages of having everything organized. Okay, so that's water and that's power. And then, as I mentioned before, with plumbing, so I've got the hybrid option of I've got the composting toilet and the connection point as well for a flushing toilet down the track if I ever needed it for whatever reason. Now, with hot water, I've decided to go with the gas hot water, which is one of the small Rinnai brands that typically come with a base model. Even though I said I wanted to minimize gas as much as possible, for hot water, because it is such an energy intensive resource and gas is much more efficient with hot water than electric is, I kind of just decided, okay, this is going to be the best option for me now, and maybe somewhere down the track I might change that and maybe not. But yeah, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be going with that. And then I guess like a side note, which might be interesting for people to know, because you have the gas hot water system, but then you've also got to get a gas hot water bottle. And so there's a rural supplies store down where I am on the south coast of New South Wales where they can deliver really big gas bottles to you and then pick up the empty bottles and then can deliver you some more as you need them. And so just thinking about things like that as well, that's something that, and if you don't have that option for you, you can just use the regular gas bottles that you might get at Bunnings or a service station or something like that. But that's a kind of a good side note to let people know of, because if you've never done anything like this before, having to organize this kind of stuff, or never having maybe used gas before too, it's good to know. And then one thing I wanted to mention about my tiny house is in regards to a washing machine. So I'd pretty much already decided before I went into the custom design meeting with Danielle that I probably wasn't going to have a washing machine. And we talked about this and she asked me a few questions about it. And, you know, with that book that I mentioned at the start by Andrew and Gabriella Morrison, they talked about all the different options that you could consider using and that they've used themselves in a tiny home over the years. So whether it's having a washing machine, but then obviously it takes up more space as well as electricity and water. And then you could maybe think about going to a laundromat if it's not such a big deal to you, or maybe you've got family or friends that you could use their washing machine. Or they talked about this thing called a Wonder Wash, which is essentially like a handheld, it's a human-powered camping type of washing setup, which you probably wouldn't be able to wash too many things. But for me, I was kind of like, I wouldn't mind doing that. It's another way to sort of minimize the use of resources and you know, electricity and water and all of that in the bigger picture. So I decided to actually get one of those Wonder Wash things just as a backup. And it turns out anyway that the landowner where I'm parking my tiny home has a washing machine there. And she said, oh, you know, you're welcome to use that if you ever want to. And my mum's also not far away too. And so, you know, I could go over there if I wanted to as well. And I'm actually happy that I've made that decision, because then it doesn't take up so much space in the tiny home too, which is already obviously a limited space. And then once I settle into my tiny home, I definitely plan to build a deck. I want to be able to spend more time outside and, you know, just be able to increase the living space or the living area as well. And, you know, be able to, whether it's, you know, sitting out on the deck and having a meal, cooking out there, having friends and family over, even doing my movement practices outside there, and just so many other things that, you know, that sort of deck vibe really lends itself to. So that's definitely something I'm going to look into once I've landed. So the cladding. When it came to the cladding, if you listen to my episode with Danielle, you'll know that I mentioned that cladding was probably one of my most challenging aspects of navigating for myself. And for me, what I went through was like, I knew what I really loved the look of in other people's designs. Like I looked at so many different tiny homes and I sent her, she said, look at as many exteriors of homes as you can. They don't even need to be tiny homes, and then send me your top 3. And so I ended up thinking, I think I even sent her maybe top 4 or top 5. And I knew what I liked, but I didn't know how I could bring it together into something that I really wanted for myself and wanted to sort of represent the essence of me as well as to be really beautiful. And I didn't want to just copy someone else's because there wasn't anything that I went, yep, I want it exactly like that. It was more like, yes, I love the colors, or I love the features, or I love the way that they've done this feature around the window in this color. And then, or I love the way that they've used a feature of timber here, but then the rest is like color bundle, something like that. And so that was like a back and forth, and we really didn't nail that down until like the very last days or week or something before I had to kind of settle everything and lock in the design. And it actually changed over time too. So what I really liked from cladding, and what I said to Danielle, is I really love, and actually this is something that really drew me to Designer Eco's builds as well from the start, is the use of the Western red cedar and that horizontal cladding style of the cedar. I just really love that timber, earthy, rustic look. But with the cost of, materials, timber and all of that being a lot more these days, I wasn't able to make the whole cladding timber, nor did I want to anyway, because the other thing to note here is that timber does actually need a lot of maintenance over time, like re-oiling and all of that, which is fine and is something that I'm going to be doing because I have decided to go with timber, but just not for the whole tiny. So initially we were going to do a feature of shiplap cedar, which is the vertical, more modern looking cedar on one of the ends of the home. And then we were going to do the rest so it was between like WeatherTex, cedar, or Colorbond. And so we're going to do the rest in WeatherTex and paint it black. And it was going to be like this, dark exterior, so black for most of the house, and then possibly white windows, and then, the shiplap cedar on the side. But then as time went by, and I think this is really good that I had quite a bit of time to go through this process and to go back and forth with Danielle and to really sit with, okay, what is it that I really want to do here, and do I want to change this now because something else has come up, or anyway. So the last design meeting that I had with her, like I said, when we were trying to sort of really nut out and clarify the cladding, I was like, you know what, I really like the color green, but not just any color green. I kind of like the sort of bushy, almost olive type green. And I showed her an example, and I said, I'm wondering what that would look like in the Colorbond. And so that we found the mangrove Colorbond color, which is very much like that. And then instead of the shiplap cedar vertical, actually go with the initial horizontal cedar that I love from the start, that I said, drew me to Design Eco years ago, and then have white windows. And as soon as I said that, something inside me shifted. I was like, yeah, like that's what it is. And Danielle drew it up for me on the 3D designer, and I saw it and I was like, yeah, that's it. Like, that's it. And before that point, when we were trying to go with the other options, something inside of me still was like, it looks beautiful, but it's not it, or it's not right. It's not quite 100% right. And when we put this all together, I was like, yeah, that's it. And it's funny how it just kind of came down to right to the end. And to oil the cedar, I got the team to use the Bioproducts Natural Exterior Timber Oil, and it has turned out so incredibly well. It's given the cedar this real honey golden-like appearance, and it smells really good, and it just looks beautiful, and it brings out the natural graininess of the timber as well. I'll put a link in the show notes for that. And then on the roof, we're using Colorbond as well, so the monument color. So I want to just talk about the natural paint that I used for a moment, because we used on the exterior for the fascia, we used the Fortitude color from the Natural Paint Co., which is the closest that we could find to Monument, the Colorbond Monument that matches the roof. And then on the interior, I'm using bio wall paint or bio products wall paint from Eco at Home. I'm just thinking about what other features I added to the tiny home in addition to the base model. Yeah, so one thing I also really loved, and this was inspired by Bryce Langton's tiny house on Living Big in a Tiny House. On one of his tiny house tours of his own home, the storage cupboards under his loft stairs had timber handles, which really kind of gave it this Scandinavian vibe. And I really love that. So I also asked Danielle if we could do something similar. And so she said, oh, let's get their guys to actually make the handles out of the same timber as the bench top. So that way it can be uniform and the same. So really excited about that. That's going to look really great. And then a last minute addition that I actually realized later was I wanted to have a timber handrail to walk down on the wall to walk down the loft stairs, just because it could potentially be steep or, maybe needing to get up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet, that kind of thing. And so we actually ended up adding that in during the build. I actually went down to their workshop recently and just to test out and say, okay, is this something I definitely want, or, now that the stairs are all in place. Yeah, and it turns out I thought, you know what, it is something that I want just for long-term sake as well, just in case. And in terms of the downlights, I've decided to supply my own downlights instead of having just the regular LED ones. I'm using Block Blue Lights downlights, which uses amber light rather than blue light. And I'm also going to be using their E27 amber bulbs for my external wall light, which will be outside the tiny home. And I use those bulbs as well for my lamp at home too, which I'll have in my tiny house. And so that link, one more time, if you want to check them out, is tinyhouseconversations.com/blue light. And the discount code for 10% off is THC podcast. Again, those details will be in the episode show notes. And just one last thing I wanted to share before we wrap this episode up is something that Danielle said to me, which I thought was really helpful, and it reminded me to come back to again and again, especially when we're thinking about what the color of the interior is going to be, and in the kitchen, do you want to just keep it white, or do you want to have color cabinets and all of this type of stuff? As she said, it's a question of if you want to add the personality in the actual build or in the objects that you put in it. So if you go white, clear and simple, you can put whatever you want next to it. And so you might find that helpful too when you're going through your own design process, whether it's doing it yourself or going with a tiny house builder. Now, thanks for being here with me today. I will be doing some more solo casts in upcoming episodes, all about different aspects of my own tiny house and tiny house journey. And as always, the links are in the episode show notes at tinyhouseconversations.com. And if you have any questions for me about some of these things that I've been talking about today, feel free to message me on Instagram, on Facebook at Tiny House Conversations, or you can send me an email at tinyhouseconversations@gmail.com. And keep a lookout on my social media pages for photos of my tiny house. I've already shared what the cladding looks like, and as the build starts to come to a completion very soon, I'll also start to share some photos of the interior with you. Thanks again for listening, and as always, stay tuned every Thursday for new episodes of Tiny House Conversations, and I'll see you on the other side. Thanks again for listening, and if you enjoyed the conversation today, you found it valuable, and you want to support the podcast, the best way you can do that is to share the love. That way I can keep bringing you more tiny house conversations to help you on your own tiny journey. So here are 3 ways that you can support the podcast. Number 1, if you have a friend or family member that you feel would benefit from hearing these conversations, feel free to share it with them, email them, text them, send them a telegram, do whatever you need to do to share it with them. Number 2, if you hit the subscribe button, you'll know exactly when the next episode is live. And number 3, if you head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and review. Thank you so much in advance. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next episode.